So I continued to keep my mission focused, and I felt really centered and authentic to what I was doing, even though I wasn't fully authentic to who I was along that journey. Now, I ultimately left Starwood, and it gave me an opportunity to think what was next. Concurrently, somebody wrote to me and said, Keith, I'm writing an article for Inc. magazine, and it's about people who've had disproportionate success at a young age. I'd like to interview you. And I said, sure, but again, be thoughtful and be generous to people who could be important to you. I sat back and I spent hours thinking, what do I have to share with this journalist in advance? I didn't want to be lazy. And I walked in and I gave him 10 tips of how I was successful. And he looked at this, went back and talked to his editor. I didn't know this. He came back to me and said, you know what? I don't want to interview you. We've decided we want the article to be you. You've just written it for us. They published the article in Inc. magazine, 10 tips of a master networker, which disgusted me. But it provided an opportunity for a publisher to call me and say, Keith, you should write a book. And I said, I've just started a firm, Ferrazzi Greenlight. I don't know that I really have time to do this. We'll give you $250,000. I will find time. I wrote Never Eat Alone, and it catapulted me into an entirely different place in the start of my company. Now, what was very interesting about this, and I'll just pause, remember the scarcity mindset, the fear, the insecurity, still there, deeply. My earliest tools that I had in life to escape and to be a seeker were prayer. I was brought up in a strong religious background with my mom, and I believe very strongly in spirituality, and prayer was my place. But unfortunately, what I was praying for as a young man was, please God, take this away from me. And it was along the way that my seekerdom finally opened up the opportunity. I wish I had found it earlier, but I approached a priest in the Anglican church and asked a question about my sexuality, my shame. And he didn't greet me with shame, he greeted me with love. And then he encouraged me to see a therapist, which I wish, I used to walk by the therapy place at Yale, wishing that I had the courage to walk in there at the time, all 4 years as I was going to class. But it wasn't until afterward, and it wasn't until I was a private individual that I could pay privately, even though I still had shame, my therapy. And then somebody mentioned this thing called meditation. And the idea was you could sit for 10 days and maybe discover something about yourself. It's called Vipassana. And it was one of the greatest door openings and gifts that I could ever possibly have in my life. And on day 7, I realized that I have everything that I need inside of myself. And it was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had in my life, and I highly recommend it for anybody in this room. Now, with all of this going on, I started this firm. I now have this book, but what was interesting is I shunned the book. The book was about networking. I had made a commitment that I was going to reinvent American manufacturing, American industry. I was going to work with the titans of the largest corporations of the world and make sure that the preservation of the jobs in those organizations, the hundreds and thousands and the millions of people, would be my contribution to the world. I didn't have time for a book about networking. I actually turned my back on it. So many of you in this room, I've already had the blessing of some of you coming up to me in the back of the room says, your book changed my life. And I didn't internalize that. I was aiming at a different thing, and I couldn't think of the congruence of them at the time. Now, along the way, by the way, let me just give you a couple of tips here. The biggest thing I learned about building networks is that networking is exhausting. The kid who wrote Never Eat Alone was running around like a one-armed paper hanger, wallpaper hanger, networking everywhere. And there's no question, if you read that book, you will smell scarcity. The tips are extraordinary. The practices are extraordinary. They allowed me to crush it in business and in life. But it's a lot. The elegance that I learned in retrospect, looking back, is there's a much more powerful way to network, and it's called building community. The simple path to that, and it's what Alex has done here. In anything that you want to achieve in this world, be the host of a beautiful community of other people who are looking to achieve it. And then that community will be your networkers. They will recruit more members, and they will allow individuals to come together, and I created a word for this, to co-elevate. Being the host of a co-elevating community is the most elegant, emotionally rich way to build the richness of the network that you need. Not to say that all of the things that I wrote about aren't valuable and important and useful, but the big takeaway in retrospect is each of you building a community, which, by the way, in my research institute, which we formed, I took from the learnings of Deloitte Research, took those into Ferrazzi Greenlight Research Institute. In our research institute, when the pandemic hit, I had recognized that this was a glorious opportunity to think about the reinvention of the future of work. I had been on that trail since 2010, and I'd been studying hybrid work since 2010, funded by a couple $1 million from people like Accenture and Cisco and others. And all of a sudden, here we were with the most beautiful laboratory of the future of work. And I decided to start a community of other people who were committed to never going back to work. We would only go forward to work. And it was the Go Forward to Work research community. In that period of time, we published 30 or so articles in Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Fortune, Fast Company, Inc., etc. We had hundreds and hundreds, thousands of individuals co-creating research and insights online. And that research institute has become one of the most beautiful things that I've been able and inspired to continue to lead and grow and looking to manifest even more and more and more. But it was the awakening that it wasn't me running around networking and selling out of scarcity and fear, but instead it was me being calm and humble and hosting a community that I could serve. Yeah. Now, what happened along the way is I wrote another book. This idea of broad networking and bringing as many people into your life and opportunity as possible made me ask the question, what about those few deep relationships? How do they look? Because the intimacy, one of the things that was created within me as a young man was an intimacy disorder. It was a sense of aloneness. My folks were of a different people. They would never accept me for who I was if I had come out to them. My dad was equally economically scarce. I loved that exercise. That meditation just took me right back to the economic scarcity that still exists in me today, but was clear to me as a child, and the anger that existed between my mother and father over money and the belief of money and all of that was born in me, and the only way out of it was for me to create my own damn nepotism. I had to divorce my family in my head as a kid and go create my own nepotism through paternal relationships like Pat LeConto at Deloitte and others, and I had to create my own family because my family weren't the family that I wished I'd been born into. And it was a very lonely exercise. And it's very similar to my sons, two of whom were in at least 20 homes before they came into our home in their teen years. You get an emotional severance from intimacy. And so I was good at the network. I was not good at the intimacy. And I started studying it. That's a wonderful gift of being a writer, which is anytime you realize you need to learn something, decide to write a book about it. And for me, that's literally how I do it. And that's why my books can take so long. I can take 10 years to write a book because it takes me that long to really get it. And so this book was the beginning of that journey of trying to get it in intimacy and connection. And this is where I realized that, and our research showed that the 3 deepest relationships in your life are the most predictive of your success, not just your network. Because they're what feeds who you are and your authentic self and your monkey mind and your scarcity versus abundance and your sense of who you of authenticity. It's all born from those tight relationships in your life. And I didn't know how to build them. As I spun ahead, I started to study the other aspects of relationships. Not just the intimate ones, not just the broad ones, but the productive ones. And I realized that we were waking up in a world where getting anything done, remember, get things done, David, what's his name? David Allen, yeah. I realized getting things done wasn't about lists, it was about people. And I realized that leadership really was more about goals that you had in your life and your ability to create networks, which with Who's Got Your Back made me realize that if I really wanted to achieve, it was my ability to co-create with extraordinary people. So I realized if I wanted to be in this world of being on stage and being of service to people, who do I need to get to know? I need to get to know Tony Robbins and Deepak Chopra. Those are the two people that came up to my mind. And I was like, okay, they're on my list. They're on my relationship action plan. Right? Peter Diamandis, who wrote an amazing book, Abundance, and is one of the great, beautiful futurists, on my list. And over the years, I've been able to lead that group of individuals. I serve Tony in his sessions and helping him move from what he does beautifully in his stage presence to thinking about how do you really create intimate community within what he creates, and Peter the same way. And so we worked as peers and buddies in our co-creation of what we're trying to serve in the world.